the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Last week, on February 11th, James Van Der Beek, who played the lead character, Dawson in Dawson's Creek, passed away. And there was a viral video that came out kind of talking about his final thoughts, his words of wisdom he wanted to pass on. He's been battling colon cancer for 2 years, and he finally lost that battle and left behind 6 kids and a wife. And what a wonderful man and a wonderful message he left. It went viral. We're going to play it for you now, guys, so you can get a little taste of what he had to say.
When I was younger, I used to define myself as an actor, which was never really all that fulfilling. And then I became a husband, and that was much better. And then I became a father, and that was the ultimate. I could define myself then as a loving, capable, strong, supportive husband, father, provider, steward of the land that we're so lucky to live on. And for a long time, that felt like a really good definition to the question, who am I? What am I? And then this year, I had to look my own mortality in the eye. And all of those definitions that I cared so deeply about were stripped from me. I was away for treatment, so I could no longer be a husband that was helpful to my wife. I could no longer be a father who could pick up his kids and put them to bed and be there for them. I could not be a provider because that wasn't working. I couldn't even be a steward of the land because at times I was too weak to prune all the trees during the window that you're supposed to prune them. And so I was faced with the question, if I am just a too skinny, weak guy with cancer, what am I? And I meditated, and the answer came through. I am worthy of God's love simply because I exist. And if I'm worthy of God's love, shouldn't I also be worthy of my own? And the same is true for you.
You know, it's important, though, we don't just hear that and let it go from one ear to the other, but really let it sink in. And really something that we kind of heard a little bit yesterday at Ash Wednesday, from dust you are and from dust you will return. Well, joining us today to help break this down and to give us a little bit, maybe more insight is Cale Clark. And you guys know him from The Faith Explained. It's that class after Mass. Hey, Cale, how are you?
I'm fantastic, Sarah, and thank you so much for having me on today to talk about this. And yeah, rest in peace, James Van Der Beek. And I don't know, Sarah, maybe you were one of those young ladies back in the day. I'd probably be willing to bet money on this, that you maybe had a poster of James Van Der Beek on your bedroom wall. He was kind of a heartthrob back in the day. Were you a Dawson's Creek fan?
You know what? I hate to make you lose money, but I was so preoccupied with the young Superman in Smallville, the other show there on the CW. I was not looking anywhere near the creek. So, no, I did not have that. But I know many people that was their show, and they would watch, for years they would watch it. It was, one of the big shows that was on that channel.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was. And of course, the great football movie Varsity Blues, he also starred in. A lot of people know him from that, too. And I just think this is incredibly profound wisdom that James Van Der Beek has come upon when he posted that video soon after his diagnosis and his treatment started. That was a few months, of course, before he passed away on February the 11th, as you said, Sarah. And I think one of the reasons why this hits people so powerfully, and it does really tie into Lent here, is because, as Van Der Beek said, and you heard in the clip, he was meditating and the answer came to him, like, really, who am I? If I can't do all these things, who am I really? I am worthy of God's love simply because I exist. And that is really revelatory to a lot of people, Sarah, because we can't define ourselves by what we do or what we can do, because that can be taken away from us ever so easily. We're not human doings. We're human beings. And there's a lot of doubt in that in people's minds. And I think in some ways, Sarah, I think it's kind of deeply rooted somehow in the American psyche. And here's an example of this. You might have heard of the famous preacher of the 18th century named Jonathan Edwards. He was a Protestant preacher, very active in this time of what's known as the Great Awakening and the Great Revival. And here's what he said in his famous sermon. This may be the most famous sermon in American history, Sarah. It was called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," if you remember that one. And he wrote these words. He says, "God and this is him talking here, not me. God abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear you in his sight. You are 10,000 times as abominable in his eyes as the most hateful, venomous serpent is in ours. End of quote. Okay, I could go on, but I think that's quite enough.
Yeah, we get the picture. Yeah, you're nothing. You're scum. That's such a harsh way to look at how God might be looking at us. And if we do have that mindset, if we have that feel of like, well, we're lower than the earth, we're nothing. Why would God love me? Why would I have to probably try to earn his love? And so we try to do all of these things, like James is talking about the things that he did. How he did this and he did that, and those were where he found his wealth, where his worth, his worthiness. And really, God is really trying to tell us the opposite of that. So how do we kind of undo that programming that's in our head that makes us feel like we have to accomplish and reach certain goals to be worthy of sainthood, to be worthy of, God's love, to be worthy of anything, really? And God says, you don't, just because you exist, you're worthy. I'm giving it to you no matter what.
Yeah, I think this is the corrective, and I think Lent can really help us with this. And when I sort of reposted this video from James on my Twitter feed at Cale Clark, C-A-L-E, Clark with an E. If you want to follow, cheap commercial there. But this is what Pope Benedict said, Sarah, in his inaugural homily when he took the Petrine office. He said this, quote, "We are not some casual and meaningless product of evolution. Each of us is the result of a thought of God. Each of us is willed. Each of us is loved. Each of us is necessary." End of quote. So Pope Benedict XVI, I think that is such an important quote, that each one of us is eternally loved, the result of a thought of God. We are willed, we are loved, we are necessary. And we hear this all the time, especially on Good Friday. If we were the only person who had ever existed on planet Earth, Christ still would have died, suffered the passion, the cross, the ignominy of it all, just for us personally. And that's a really hard thing for each one of us to believe. And St. Paul even had a hard time believing it. In one of his letters, he says that Christ gave himself for me. It's almost like the sun shining on a field of grass. Every one of those blades is kind of like us. And even if there was only one blade of grass, the sun would still shine on it. Jesus would have died just for us personally. So this idea of our value, who we are as sons and daughters of God, is an identity that we really have to work hard to kind of overcome our cultural programming to realize the truth. And this is really the big message of Lent, that God is not out to get us. He doesn't want to zap us. He wants us to come back home to him, to the house of the Father, so that we can be loved and discover this truth and let that animate our life, not living out of fear.
Well, just that word alone, that we are necessary, man, that can really hit really deep for a lot of people. I think there's one point in all of our lives where we think, what is the whole point of this? Why do I need to be here? If I was gone, would it even matter, at all? And obviously we have the movies like It's a Wonderful Life that tell us, yes, we matter more than we think. But God says we're necessary. He wouldn't have allowed us to be created if we weren't necessary. And that really, even when we're not doing big, amazing things, it seems like to us, it seems like we're just doing our little job, and maybe we're, just raising kids, or we're doing, it seems like little things, like we're not doing anything huge or big or amazing. And yet God is still calling, wants to use us, wants us to be his, wants us to love and trust him. And that's something that, we hear about, why did this bad thing why did James Van Der Beek have to get this cancer? Why did he have to die? And you're hearing his message. I feel like he understands and he trusts God at this point. He's gotten to that point, before God is not just something that he tried to squeeze in anymore. It was something that was so central to him. And that's something, it's the mystery of God. Maybe God is always trying to get our attention, and sometimes he has to use a disease, a terrible accident, a death that's close to us to really get our attention and help us to understand that love that he has for us.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Sarah. And, death, disease, disasters are not something that pleases God or anything like that. But he does use those things to get our attention. And pain, as one writer said, pain is God's megaphone, because for some people that's the only thing that's going to get their attention. And so he's got to get our attention so that we can get to know him and get to know what he really wants for our lives. And of course, one of the big things in Lent, Sarah, is almsgiving. And I want to just mention that, in touch with that. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about financial giving, because we talk about that a lot when it comes to almsgiving, but it's also giving the gift of our talents, and also our time to God. And these are really the only three things we can give to God: our time, our talents, and our treasure. But I want to just talk about time for 1 second, because we don't know how much time is left, number one. James Van Der Beek probably thought he was going to live a long life with his beautiful family, his 6 children, his wife Kimberly, and they're just so obviously shattered as they're rebuilding their lives here. But you probably hear a lot about tithing, especially when it comes to financial giving. It's not something that we practice in the Catholic Church, where you have to give 10% of your income. We look at it a little bit more flexibly. But in a lot of Christian traditions, the idea of the tithe is sacrosanct. You give 10% of your income to God. And it's not necessarily a bad guideline. It comes from the Bible, of course. We think of Abraham giving 1/10 of everything to this mysterious figure, Melchizedek, who obviously is a prefigurement of Christ. But I want to talk about sort of our tithe of time. That's one way to look at it. Because as Pope Gregory the Great said one time, he said, Lent is our tithe of time to the Lord Jesus Christ. I've done the math. You don't have to pull out your calculator.
Good, thank you.
40 days. Okay, the 365 days in the year. 40 days is 10.9% to be exact.
Good. Okay.
So if you really want to do something, whether it's watch the Olympics, watch Canada dominate in men's hockey in the Olympics.
Okay, watch yourself.
You make time for it. We've got to
Yes,
make some
we
time
do.
for God as well. And that's when we're really going to discover his love. Just when you spend time with our loved ones, we get that too. So I think that's, we're running out of time here, but that's the one thing I would ask people to think about as we go forward here.
That was the Best of the Week on Relevant Radio. The best way to listen to the Best of the Week is on the Relevant Radio app. Free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.